We were told the Jeffrey Epstein story was over, that he was arrested, that his accomplice was convicted, and that, in some grim twist of fate, justice had been served before he ever faced a jury. They wanted the world to move on, but the world never did. And for good reason, because what if his death wasn't the end of the story? What if it was the beginning of a cover-up that's still happening in 2026? Years later, the full truth feels more buried than ever, and we're going to show you why, from a secret deal that shielded his entire network to the bizarre circumstances of his death that still can't be fully explained. Let's go back and break down what actually happened. Here's the version of events they want you to accept. Jeffrey Epstein, a monstrous sex trafficker, was arrested in 2019. His accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell, was convicted and is now serving 20 years. And Epstein himself died by suicide in a federal jail before he could ever take the stand. Case closed. Two bad people brought to justice. It's a clean story, convenient even, but it's full of holes. Because Epstein's crimes didn't happen in a vacuum. They were enabled by money, by connections, by powerful people who, to this day, have never been held accountable. The official narrative exists to make you believe this was about two individuals. It wasn't. The real battle didn't end in a jail cell. It moved somewhere else entirely, into a war over information. A war that very powerful people appear determined to win by keeping the evidence locked away. To understand the cover-up, you have to go back to 2007, because that's when the blueprint was written. Federal prosecutors in Florida had built a serious case. They'd gathered evidence of Epstein abusing dozens of underage girls. A 60-count federal indictment had already been drafted, the kind of charges that could have meant life in prison. But it was never filed. Instead, a deal was struck. The man who signed off on it was Alexander Acosta, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. The non-prosecution agreement was signed on September 24, 2007. Under it, Epstein pleaded guilty to two lesser state charges in 2008 and served less than 13 months at a minimum security county facility. And for most of that time, he wasn't even really locked up. Under a work release arrangement, he was allowed to leave for up to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, a schedule that was later quietly expanded to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. He was driven by a personal bodyguard to an office at a nonprofit he had recently set up himself, with his own attorney listed as his work supervisor. But the most troubling part of this deal wasn't the lenient sentence. It was the immunity. The agreement didn't just protect Epstein. It granted sweeping immunity to 4 named co-conspirators: Sarah Kellen, Adriana Ross, Leslie Groff, and Nadia Marcinkova. And, critically, to any potential co-conspirators beyond them. That clause effectively shut down the FBI's broader investigation into his network just as it was gaining momentum. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card, not just for one man, but for an entire web of people who may have been involved. So why would a federal prosecutor agree to something like that? Acosta has defended the deal. But years later, a more unsettling explanation emerged. According to journalist Vicky Ward, a source told her that during Acosta's vetting for a cabinet position, he allegedly said he was told to back off the Epstein case because Epstein belonged to intelligence and was above his pay grade. Acosta has repeatedly and categorically denied making that statement, including under oath, and a DOJ Office of Professional Responsibility investigation found no evidence that Epstein was ever an intelligence asset. But the allegation has never fully gone away, and it raises a question that's never been satisfactorily answered. Why did a federal prosecutor trade a 60-count indictment for a slap on the wrist? Fast forward to August 2019. Epstein is in federal custody, awaiting trial on new charges. He's one of the highest-profile inmates in the country. And then, one morning, he's found dead in his cell. The official ruling: suicide by hanging. But the circumstances surrounding that night are so riddled with documented failures, they're almost hard to believe. The 2 guards assigned to monitor Epstein that night, one on his 5th straight day of overtime, the other working a mandatory double shift, both fell asleep. They failed to conduct any inmate checks for roughly 8 hours, from 10:30 p.m. to 6:30 a.m. They were later indicted for falsifying records, having signed more than 75 separate log entries, falsely claiming they'd completed their required rounds. Both eventually reached deferred prosecution agreements, avoiding jail time in exchange for cooperation with the DOJ Inspector General's review. Then, there's the surveillance footage. Just weeks before his death, after a first alleged suicide attempt, the footage from outside his cell was permanently lost when staff looked up the wrong cell number while trying to preserve it, a clerical error confirmed by federal prosecutors. gone from both the primary and backup systems. On the night he died, it was even worse. The DOJ Inspector General's 2023 report revealed that 10 of the 11 cameras in Epstein's special housing unit weren't recording at all. Their DVR hard drives had been malfunctioning, and staff had discovered the problem 2 days earlier, but hadn't fixed it. The one working camera captured only a sliver of a staircase. A CBS News forensic analysis of footage later released by the DOJ found significant discrepancies. The file appeared to have been created nearly 6 years after the death, was assembled from 2 separate video segments with different aspect ratios, and showed footage that had been slightly sped up. This was independently confirmed by Wired magazine, whose analysis found the video had been assembled using Adobe Premiere Pro with nearly 3 minutes trimmed. The FBI stated the video was reconstructed from a backup system, and the DOJ said its conclusions were unchanged. And then there's the medical evidence. Dr. Michael Baden, a famed forensic pathologist hired by Epstein's brother Mark to observe the official autopsy, publicly disputed the suicide ruling. He said Epstein's injuries, including fractures to the left and right thyroid cartilage and the left hyoid bone, were more consistent with homicidal strangulation than suicidal hanging. The city's chief medical examiner, Dr. Barbara Sampson, stood firmly by her conclusion of suicide, noting that such fractures can occur in both suicides and homicides, and that the full evidence supported the hanging determination. So you have sleeping guards, a near-total camera blackout, disputed forensic findings. The official story asks you to accept all of that as coincidence, as incompetence. Maybe it was. But when that level of failure lines up perfectly to protect the most powerful people connected to the case, the question has to be asked. In recent years, some information has come out. Under enormous public pressure, a federal judge, Loretta Preska, ordered the release of previously sealed documents from a 2015 defamation lawsuit. Those records named nearly 190 individuals, associates, witnesses, victims, and contacts connected to Epstein's operation. But here's the thing. What's been released is a fraction of what exists. The names that appeared weren't a client list, and many were already public figures. Their inclusion doesn't prove wrongdoing, but it does paint a picture of the world he operated in, and the scope of that world is vast. The financial side remains largely in the dark. Investigations revealed that major banks, JPMorgan Chase and Deutsche Bank, processed enormous sums of money for Epstein, ignoring red flags for years. JPMorgan paid $290 million in a class action settlement to more than 100 victims. Deutsche Bank paid $75 million to settle a separate victims lawsuit, and Deutsche Bank was fined an additional $150 million by the New York State Department of Financial Services for its relationship with Epstein, among other compliance failures. This isn't just about one man anymore. It's about the institutions, the banks, the systems, the people in power who looked the other way for years while it happened. So here's where we are. A 2007 deal replaced a 60-count federal indictment with less than 13 months of partial custody and handed sweeping immunity to an entire network of potential co-conspirators. A 2019 death in federal custody came wrapped in sleeping guards, a near-total surveillance failure, and forensic findings that 2 experts couldn't agree on. And a slow, grinding legal process has released some documents, but kept the most incriminating evidence buried. This story stopped being about Jeffrey Epstein a long time ago. It's about the institutions that protected him, the money that flowed around him, the powerful people who have never been named, never been charged, and never been held to account. The unsealed documents, the bank settlements, the conflicting official stories, they all point to the same conclusion. The cover-up isn't something that happened. It's something that's still happening, slowly, quietly, because the list of people with something to lose is long enough and powerful enough to keep bending the system in their favor. We know what Epstein did. The question that still doesn't have an answer is, who helped him do it? And who is still being protected today?